All right, I just wanted to talk about designing architecture and modular systems with scriptable objects. Nothing too serious. I just want to get into it a little bit, just so you can understand how to make items, RPG items, into scriptable objects. And this will actually allow you to make your systems more modular. You'll be able to make them from the asset menu for every different RPG item that you want. It'll allow for quick plug and play. And let's just take a look real quick. This is how it's going to be set up. Basically, we're going to have mono behavior, which sits on a game object. And this controls how the game interacts with it. So, for example, we're going to put this interactable mono behavior on any item that is able to be interacted with. And so far, in our previous tutorials, we've made this interactable. All it does is check for clicks. If you click an object that has the interactable class on it, it runs its interaction function. And what we can do with the RPG items is we can make a usable class that derives from this interactable class. And we can put that usable class on items that we want picked up, which means that now we have items that when we click it, we can interact with it, and specific items that we want picked up. So this could be like a computer. You click a computer, you obviously don't want to pick it up, you just want to use it, interact with it. Or if you click a sword and you want it to be able to be picked up, you put the usable class on there. And these contain things like, a couple items like this, boots. I just have a couple scripts here, couple icons here just for example. And all of these, if you want each of these to do something different when you're trying to pick it up, in the current state of what everything is, basically we would have to make a new class for each of these items, and we'd have to derive from usable. And this is not very modular. Basically what we have here is an interact function from the interactable. On our usable, we can override the interact function. So for example, if we want to call our pickup script on our interact on the usable, then that's where we do it. And this gets kind of messy because then for each one of our classes, we have to override our pickup if we want them to do something different. So just take a look at this. Hopefully it makes sense. So basically what we're doing is as our game gets more complex, we're creating functions in the parent class. As more complex as our game gets, we're gonna have to overwrite all of those functions if we want that item to do something specific, different from everything else. For example, if you pick up boots, it runs a certain check if you can walk on water or not, for example, which calls a different script, and it can get messy very quickly. So instead, we have an interactable object, mono behavior. This sits on our game object, anything that we want to interact with. Right now that's just clicking. So now what we can do instead is create a simple variable, scriptable object variable, that we can use as an item blueprint, so we can plug in items. So this is what I mean. So we're going to make two classes, and I'll show you an example in a minute. And we're going to make item scriptable object. And these will be able to be accessed and created through the asset menu. So we're going to create a new asset for every type of item that we want. And these are going to be able to be just plugged right into that variable on our interactable behavior script on our game object. Under our item scriptable object class, we can define as many different functions as we want. When we call these, let's say we're going to create a new usable class deriving from interactable, and we're going to put this mono behavior on any item in our game that we want to be able to be picked up. Now, when we run the function, all we have to do is call this.itemBlueprint.pickup. This system makes it a lot more modular. It doesn't have to rely on each other. Basically, we don't have to, when we're defining stuff here, we don't have to worry about overriding it over here in our actual item class. So we can define as many different type of functions and variables in our item class, simply plug it in to our interactable variable, the item blueprint variable, and instantly we have access to all of their functions, all of their stats, all of their variables. And this makes it super easy to create different functions for each different item. I'm going to show you in detail, so hopefully it makes more sense. So I want to get into building this scriptable object class, and I'm going to try to walk you through how we would use it in our game exactly. I already have the item class here, but I'm going to just make a new one called items. So I just organized this into scriptable object folder, usable items. So we're going to right click and go to create, and we're going to create a C# script, and we'll call this items. Enter. Open this up. Now, since this is a scriptable object, we don't need these, so we'll delete that. Change this to a scriptable object. What we want to do is we want to be able to create assets in Unity. So every time we have, like, let's say we want to add a screwdriver to the game, or a sword, or a weapon, or a shield, or whatever, we're going to be able to just right click our game in Unity and select the asset. So to do that, we create asset menu. For example, let's just do this, and we'll go back into Unity real quick. Now we go in here, right click, go to create, and we have our items class right there. What this does is it creates an asset file, and that asset file is what we're able to plug into mono behaviors. So I'll show you that in a minute. But we don't want that right now, so we're just going to go back to Visual Studio, and we're going to customize this. At least for me, it's easier. We're going to create its file name. Oops. File name is going to be, or we could do, usable item, and the menu name is going to be. You could do, yeah, and there's no right or wrong. You can do whatever you want, whatever's best for you. And I'm just going to do interactable item. What that gets us, it organizes our system, so the more scriptable objects that we include in the game, the more easier it is to just track them down instead of just having that big ass list. So now when we right click here, we go to create, and it's actually in our list right now. And this is just from my previous stuff, so you can ignore that. But it just kind of organizes it however many layers you need or want. So let's go back to that class. Now we want to have some basic functions in here. We're going to put a name, but if we use the name class, that's already taken, as you can see here. So we're just going to create a name, and this will just store the actual name. What I do is I store the name, like how it's going to be displayed to the player. And then we're just going to do public. We're going to create a sprite, and this is just the icon that our item has, and we'll name that icon. So that's really all you need for this items class. And what we're going to do, just for example, is we're going to do an example of pickup. So public void, or we're going to do a virtual void because we want to be able to override it later. So just so we can see like what exactly is going on right now. Okay, so that's all you need for your scriptable item class. Let's use this as an example, right? So we're going to go over here, and the folder's names don't matter. You can see that I already have a screwdriver in here. That's what these little red things on the map are. They're not the best, I just programmer art. But if we go into here, we'll go to create, and we're going to create a new item. We'll just say sword. So what we've done now is we've created an asset, and this sword asset is going to be able to store all the sword's variables right here, we can change any variable we want. And not only that, but when it comes down to it, if we want the sword to do something specific, we can rewrite this scriptable object code, and we can do something like this. It'd be in a new folder, obviously, but we could do a public class sword that derives from item, and then we could do public override. We override the actual pickup, and then we can describe what we want here. And this will allow us to simply go over here, back into Unity, right click, and we can go to create interactable item, and then we could have a little sword right here. Like this is what I have from my previous project, item weapon. But here you could have sword, you could have whatever you want. Anyway, moving on. So we've created the sword, and let's just set the sprite. I don't have any swords, that's the problem. Here, we'll just use a gun. We'll just use the gun. Okay. So we got the icon, we got the name. Now, the way we would set this up is we'd go onto our actual main map, and here I have it organized under pickupable objects. Right click, create empty. Now this is just a game object. Doesn't have anything current on it. We'll name this sword. So where is this in our game? Let's see. Alright, our sword's over here for some reason. And we'll just move that. You don't have to move it. Now our sword doesn't have anything on it. We're going to add a component, and this is where we add our interactable. This interactable mono behavior sits on the game, and it interacts between the game. So any physics, when you click the object, and what it does is it'll do what it needs to do, and then it'll use our sword's asset file. So for example, we'll click the game object and drag this sword asset file into the actual item right here. And see, it didn't work because our class names are different for this tutorial. So let's just change that real quick. I don't mean to confuse you, but this project is already kind of set up, and if I remove stuff or change stuff, it's just going to get in the way. So we'll just do a tutorial item, go back into Unity. Alright, so now what we do is we drag this sword onto our tutorial item. Now this interactable script will be able to call this sword's functions at any time, and all we have to do, if we want this item to be a screwdriver, we could drag the screwdriver asset onto here. And we can actually use this, we can change the editor to grab all this, like the sprite icon and the name, change the name, and we can have it edit as we're working in the Unity editor. In the game we can change our items, we don't even have to delete the game object, we can just switch our asset files. All you have to do is swap and switch, and it's good for designers too who don't know how to code. All they have to do is right click and create a new sword or whatever, and just drag it into whatever they need it to be in. Alright, I'm going to end this tutorial here. I don't want it to be too long. In the next tutorial we're going to build onto this by expanding the interactable class to be able to pick up items, to do other things, and we'll see more of an example with that, with these asset files and the scriptable objects. This tutorial is just a primer. We cover some general concepts in this. You can read more about scriptable objects. I'll put some links in the tutorial below that you can read about. This is just kind of like a primer. In the next tutorial is where we put everything together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.
Hey, thanks for checking out my tutorial. If you're looking for more in-depth information, I have courses you won't find on YouTube. You'll learn what professional games like these use for physics to create amazing effects, stuff like gravity guns, hovering items, advanced 2D particle effects, screen warping, teleportation effects, warp speed blurs, and so much more. Go to 2dinunity.com, enter your email. I'll send you an in-depth tutorial that covers more than just the basics of an RPG. This includes multiplayer networking, lobby systems, chat input, essentially everything to go from an average-looking indie game to a professional game industry standard. If not, you can still keep watching my free material on YouTube. Thanks for all your support, and I'll see you in the next video.